All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Thank you so much for coming to the Provoke Coach podcast. We're live with a very special guest, a gentleman that I've known for many, many years now in the fitness industry and in corporate America, has now ventured on to serving the community in such a way that is so powerful in this world that we live in right now. Mr. Dan McCaw, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So, I guess we'll really get started with, there's going to be a lot of people that are on the call that, they know who you are. They know where you come from. They know about you, but there's going to be a lot of people that are listening either now or maybe even in the future that really don't know who you are. So, tell us, Dan, who are you? What are you doing right now in today's, present day?
Well, like you already mentioned, my name's Dan McCaw. Currently, I'm serving as a police officer in a small community in northeastern Detroit, right? While I'm over there, I'm serving the community as a patrol officer on the midnight shift. I'm also involved with a few different things in our department. I'm assigned to our department's regional special response team. I'm an instructor for firearms and defensive tactics, and also a training officer for new oncoming recruits.
So when people first get started, they want to be an officer. I mean, they come in where they're a brand new officer. They've already been approved credentials wise, and they're really now coming into the training of everything, the everyday work. And that's what you're involved in, right? You get everybody going on the right track through training now.
Yeah, so recently I've been added to what we call an FTO list, a field training officer list. And each shift has a field training officer. Being at my department, we're a little bit of a smaller community, and we have one training officer per shift. And that officer will rotate, that new officer, I should say, will rotate through FTOs. So it's our job to assess their ability to interact with the public, their attitude towards the public, attitude towards law enforcement, and how well they can pick up different things like communication, geography, and working their way around report writing, evidence collection, and the basic functions of being a police officer. And of course, this comes like anything through repetition. So our job, we grade them on a daily basis while they spend time with us. And the way it works here is they go through 4 different phases, and each phase is building upon the prior phase. So in the first phase, let's say the new officer will be responsible for doing like 10 or 20% of the work, and we will assist them in the rest. The next phase, they take on more responsibility in their second phase, and by their third phase, they're doing almost all of the work. Then we do what's called a shadow phase, and during that period of time, we're merely observing how these officers handle themselves as a solo officer, because this is where we make the decision. Are they ready for solo patrol, and are they not? Can they handle themselves? Are they safe? Right. Are they providing our citizens with the proper service in terms of being knowledgeable in the laws, how civil functions work, and things like that?
So I guess when people are coming, and I appreciate, that explanation, Dan, they're coming on board. How has that changed? Because you've been in law enforcement for quite some time now, and I know your family has, and we'll maybe get into that a little bit later. This world that we live in right now, how has that training changed versus just a few years back?
Well, the training has increased, right? We're not going to try to touch on too much of the politics of everything, but it is what it is, right? We live in a crazy world right now. We're overrun by the COVID pandemic. We have a very sensitive time in law enforcement, unlike any other since maybe the civil rights era, post-Vietnam era, that kind of a thing. So nowadays, departments are going above and beyond to make sure that their officers are trained in all these different things. You have to be a police officer, a teacher, a mentor, a shoulder to cry on, a mental health expert, a social worker, right? An EMT sometimes. So there's all these different things that we have to get training for. And a lot of that stuff is covered in the academy, but you really don't learn it until you get what we call that on the job training, boots on the ground. You're taking these calls, because every call is going to be different. There is no, I was out on routine patrol or I was on a routine traffic stop, right? There.
Yeah, we're back. I think.
What happened there?
Yeah, well, hey, look, life happens, right? That's what happens.
We're talking about all this craziness in the world and the internet drops, right? But yeah, so that, like I was saying, that on the job training, I mean, every call is different, every traffic stop is different, and nowadays we're seeing a lot of these things happen on traffic stops, which have always been one of the most dangerous functions that police officers can engage in, along with domestic violence calls, because of the heightened emotions when there's a family trouble. So it really, comes down to how well is an officer trained and how well is that department trained to be better equipped to handle these calls. And also depending on the area in which you work, okay, if you work in a higher crime area, well, those officers may be better suited to handle that worst call ever moment, right? Versus an area that doesn't have a lot of crime and their regular functions are barking dog complaints, traffic complaints, parking complaints, civil disputes at a business versus shootings, stabbings, fights, those kind of things. So these things vary, but what a lot of people fail to recognize is that violent occurrence that happens regularly in one city and doesn't happen regularly in the other can happen anywhere at any time for a magnitude of reasons. So this is where training is just so important, and having the proper people in place to conduct the training is another big factor as well, right? Because, they say there's no bad students, there's only bad teachers. I'm a believer in that. Growing up, I had a lot of great teachers, a lot of great coaches, a lot of great mentors in the professional world, yourself included. And that's all those things combined are really kind of what's led me in the path that I've gone in, which, separate from serving, it's teaching and mentoring as well, whether it's fitness related, which we've spoke on earlier, or it's this law enforcement route as well.
Yeah. Well, and I guess, for you, Dan, I mean, obviously you are, kind of cross-trained in a lot of these different disciplines. So that allows you to be essentially better suited for you to educate, for you to motivate, for you to teach, these new, rookies, I guess, let's call them, or new people, to the department to really understand fully what is going on. Now, I do have a question for you based on, we're talking about, kind of personality and what happens and when it happens and stuff like that. Do you feel as though that through the training or anything that you went through in your lifetime, why isn't that first responders have this unique ability to get into a hyper focus or a flow state when complete chaos is going on? I just want to pick your brain about that, because it is really kind of a superpower in a way. And I'll give you this example. Paramedic, doctors don't freak out. Police officers typically don't freak out, when they see a little blood or something happens, an accident. It is really more of a calm flow state to try to get things accomplished. Can you touch on that for a second?
Absolutely. I think what it comes down to is, people go and they do jobs to make money, right? And it's a means to an end, but it's not their calling. It's not their passion. So when people like nurses, doctors, EMT, police, fire, military personnel, right, they sign up for those jobs because they are driven to it by a force they can't explain deep inside within them. And it really is a calling for them, and myself included, right? Now, sometimes you don't always realize this when you get into it. You have a passion for it, and there's a turn point moment in your career maybe where you're like, okay, I'm exactly where I need to be. And you recognize there and then, it's like the epiphany, right? This is my calling. This is what I am meant to do. And, I'm sure I could do several other things, right? Be a teacher. That was one of my, pre-planned majors in college, health and wellness, coaching, personal training, what have you. But I came from a law enforcement family. I grew up around it. And that has a lot to do with where I'm at today as well. My father was on the job. My grandfather was on the job. Both had very lengthy, successful careers. So I had their perspective on it, and everyone kind of expected that I would do that. So I actually rebelled it initially until I came to a point in life where I was like, this is what I want to do. And, even at that point in time, I was a bit unsure on what it was, but down the line through within my career, like I said, there are some moments where you just know, and it happens for every officer at a different point in time. It could be a personal experience. Maybe you were a victim of a crime, let's say, and you handled yourself so well or differently than you would thought, and that drives you towards this career. I know an officer like that. He was involved in a carjacking, and he didn't back down from the person, and they ended up fleeing. And in his brain, he was like, I don't want this to happen to other people. I need to sign up. And that's that he got started, right? So everyone's path is a bit different, but ultimately it's the driving force inside that allows you to operate under this extreme pressure sometimes. And, when you're on the job, you are a little bit more hyper-focused all the time because it is a dangerous job.
Yeah.
So,
well, and that element of danger, I know, Dan, it obviously heightens, a lot of your senses, right? The element of danger and fear, and, you're holding a loaded weapon, right? Like you're holding a lot of power, right? And, but others have a lot of power as well, especially in this world that we're in now, because you don't ever know what's really going on. And that element of the unknown, I'm sure that heightens your senses. But, I started interviewing people that were, in these positions, including yourself, about how is it that they just shut everything off. Top athletes do this all the time. They totally turn off everybody, right? Performers do this and stuff like that. And they get into this flow state. And it's interesting that you said it, is that you have a calling to this, and people in your space, right? Whether they're officers, like you said, military, EMTs, doctors, they get into this zone because of their love and their passion that is way deeper than just the monetary value of it, right? Because salespeople can say that too, but that's probably just a Red Bull, right? And a couple of cups of coffee, right? And a heightened clothes, right? That's just not the same thing. How do you teach that? Are there things that you guys do in your teaching and in your education to prepare somebody to get into that state, to find that and go?
I mean, that's a great question, right? In my experience, in my opinion, having trained other officers, there's some that just don't have it, right? That it. In every profession, there's that it. They've got it. They may not know everything, right? But they're thinkers, they're doers, they're problem solvers, right? And that has a lot to do with maybe how they were raised, or the driving force. Are they confident in their abilities, or confident that they will figure it out? Right?
Yes.
A person who's in my line of work, a person who's assertive, sure of themselves, unwavering, right? Has courage, all these buzzwords, right? They don't need to know everything about police work, but they'll display through their limited knowledge and experience from, let's say, just the academy and the concepts that they've learned. And they're sure that they know their laws and what they can and can't do, their departmental policies, right? As new officers, few months on the job. This is where they take all that information they've been given and they apply it correctly. Now, if they're not doing that, they're not responding to training, maybe they don't have it, and it's not to say, and maybe they just don't have it right then. Maybe something needs to have a turn point in their life where all of a sudden it clicks. Again, some have it sooner than later, than others, but it has a lot to do with, I think, your self-confidence. That's a big one, generally, so that you're not afraid to act necessarily. And even in these dangerous circumstances, if you're unafraid, that's kind of an odd thing, right? Like, you're not afraid to get shot at or get hurt or what have you. Well, that's an entirely different thing. The difference is being afraid, but having the ability to work through the fear and handle the situation, because you're not worried about yourself. You're worried about everyone else's, the victims involved, or, and even the bad guys' safety as well, right? That's something we've seen in the past years with officer shootings and things like that. You go from being the protector and warrior of the victims, which sometimes causes a bad outcome for the perpetrator, but now we're going right into life-saving efforts. And you got to be able to work through those stresses and juggle these different mindsets on the fly in an instant. And that comes through experience, right? The first time you experience it, you might not be so great at it, but you got your wits about you and you handle it well. And then you recap and coach for the next time. And it's through that learning experience that officers grow and become better officers and more well-suited for these higher calls, if you will, where they're more involved, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. It makes sense. It's quite interesting. I mean, I just think about, officers having, especially our law enforcement, having the ability to just, keep cool and keep calm in situations of antagonization. And for, I guess, the only word to use is provoke, right? And getting provoked on a regular basis, but not in a good way. Right. And you find that, over the last year since COVID and some of the, challenging times, as you called them earlier, are things getting harder? Is there light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, for all this?
Well, I believe there is, right? And there's probably a lot of people on the job right now in different areas outside of Michigan. You see it all the time on social media. You hear it maybe from some of your coworkers. The job is dead. Oh, the job's dead. Hands are tied, this, that, and the other. And I don't buy into that, right? I'm never going to do anything else. I mean, something astronomical would have to happen to pull me away from police work, right? Yeah. But I think you have to approach everything with empathy, right? You have to be empathetic to situations like the community that you serve. You show up on a domestic call. You have the person who's in the wrong, who committed the crime. You have the victim, and you have to be empathetic to that situation. Or you pull up to the neighbor dispute, and you got both people who think they're in the right or the wrong. And you have to be the separating party and explain these things. In sense of what's going on in the world right now, you have to be empathetic towards the other side. Not saying agree with it, but putting yourself in the shoes of the other side of things. It's the same thing with politics. Yeah. Right. And we're not going to get into political views and such, but having the conversation and being open-minded enough and empathetic enough to have the conversation with somebody whose views are different than you is half the battle in our society today, right? Because everyone thinks that they're right and only wants to battle it out and debate it out to be right and heard, but don't want to understand the other side. You got your two extremes, right? And you almost have that in every profession. It's just right now in our society, politics, COVID, vaccination, not vaccination, law enforcement, and those things. These are extreme things right now. So being able to understand the people that you relate with, okay, on a daily basis is half the battle, no doubt about it. So if you can do that, you can survive the hard times, right? Yeah. And that may not change the outcome. Well, like in my example, okay, being empathetic to the situation at hand or whatever it is. It doesn't mean an arrest isn't going to be made,
Yeah.
How, we conduct ourselves while on that scene and communicate with the parties involved, it may make for a much easier arrest in terms of compliance. Hey, I totally understand where you're coming from, and you got to understand, man, this is the law. This is the way the law works.
Yeah.
Let's have a problem, but we got to go. And you put the cuffs on, you make the arrest, and you go on about it. And a lot of times I'll have conversations with individuals on the way to taking them in for a said crime. And they're giving me their life story and the hardships and some things that have led them to make the bad decisions that they made. And I'm empathetic to that. Like, I can understand because of the modeling, the poor modeling that they had, or absentee parents, or foster care system, or whatever the case, or just some bad guidance has led them to this thing. But they knew it was wrong, but it happened because it was the way that maybe a person grew up. Though that's just one example to kind of shed a little bit of light on that empathy.
Well, and not to interrupt you, we've always learned, throughout the years, right, in leadership training, one of the first things that you learn is it's okay to show empathy. As a matter of fact, you should show empathy.
Correct.
But what you can't always do is you can't show sympathy.
Right.
And that's it's a huge difference, because that would be like you, Dan, saying, you know what? All right, I'll give you one more chance here. Right. Like, let's move on. No, I understand. Get help. We need to help you, but all the more reason, you stick to your guns, you know what I mean? But that's, but that's important, Now, do you feel that a lot of people, they want sympathy, or do they want empathy? Because, in a lot of cases, everybody's trying to talk themselves, out of, getting into trouble, in a lot of cases. What do you find? Is that changing, or?
No, I find a lot of times, whether it's, let's say, police work, or when we used to work together in fitness, right? You get a lot of deflection, right?
Yeah.
You get, well, why are you worrying about me? What about that? Right? It happens all the time. It happens in almost every relationship in human nature, to deflect from yourself and focus on something else to almost justify that what you did was not so bad.
Right.
For whatever the case, if we're not busy at work and we're out conducting traffic enforcement details, right? The purpose of that is so that there's no car accidents, little kids playing in the street aren't getting hit by cars, and things of that nature, right? And through that comes tickets sometimes, right? So if you pull someone over initially, I always start off a traffic stop the very same way. Hi, I'm Officer McCaw with my said police department. Do you know why I stopped you today? Right? Because you never know what you're going to hear. Sometimes, and I'll pause that intro right there. Sometimes I don't even get that out of my mouth. The window comes down. Why are you pulling me over for? It's a hostile thing right off the bat. And I can understand that, because everything that people are seeing right now is police that, bad law enforcement, bad training, bad tactics, what have you. And I get people that are hyper alert. Right now, when that happens, I have a way of responding, right? That can be good or bad. It can be escalating or de-escalating, right? And I always will do my best to provide customer service, right? Because this is a business, right? Police work is a business in the sense of that we are out providing customer service to the residents in the city that we serve, or community rather, right? City, township, village, what have you. So at this point in time in this traffic stop, I'm getting a hostile verbiage and whatnot. I simply will just say, well, I'll tell you in a minute. Okay. And then I start my spiel over again. Hi, I'm Officer McCaw,
right,
etc. And do you know why I stopped you today? No, you're probably out here just messing with me. I'm like, well, okay. Can you provide me with your license? And we used to say license, registration, proof of insurance. And now it's just license and insurance. But I still say it because I'm so used to saying it, right?
Right.
And maybe they'll give it. Maybe I'll get some flack right there. And so now this changes the dialogue, but it just goes back to the customer service. Well, I'll tell you in a minute once you provide me with your information. Failing to do so is obstructing, right? And that's a charge in and of itself. And I'm educating them on, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. So let's say the license gets provided, the insurance gets provided. Now I know who I'm dealing with. Okay, John, the reason why I stopped you today was A, B, and C. You were speeding, you ran that red light. I followed you from here to there and observed these things. It was captured on my in-dash cam. Let me ask you, where are you going so fast today? What's the hurry? You know, I kind of want to find out where they're going. Now, this leads into all kinds of other things, right? Wow. Sometimes if the person was in the wrong, I'll get a slew of excuses. My family's in the hospital. I'm going to go to the bathroom on myself, or whatever the case was. And some of these things are verifiable facts, right? I can, well, okay, what hospital are they at? What are they there for? Oh, they're at the local hospital. Well, okay, cool. I can call and verify that, right? But generally, I grab their information. I go back and check out their driving record, which I always ask them how that is. And now we're starting to put together this traffic investigation. And depending on what factors come up, I can opt, as long as it's something not egregious, to educate the driver on our city ordinances, our driving laws. You'd be surprised at how many people don't know driving laws. And it makes me wonder, because I know when we were younger, we went through driver's training through the high school. That's not exactly a thing anymore. It's private companies. And I've watched on the road private companies with student drivers, and these student drivers are terrible. But then you see the same car with the teacher driver driving around, and that driver is terrible as well. So what we're getting is bad coaching, right? Yeah. It's the same thing as bad mentoring at home by parents or teachers or what have you. And now this creates a society of our youth or our young adults that are now going out into the world, dealing in professional circumstances or lawful circumstances with bad guidance. Yeah. It's almost like, how do you expect them to know what the right path is when they got all this bad guidance? They grew up thinking this is the way. And but it's not how the rest of society functions. So you can be an educator and a mentor right on the spot. And sometimes it still involves getting a ticket. But my whole goal in these interactions and even on calls is to get a thank you, officer, or thanks, be safe. And it happens 90% of the time. It's pretty rare.
Well, and that's important that you say that too, Dan, because really here, if anybody could listen, just like social media is a highlight film for the best of the best in your life.
Never shows the bad.
But it's also on the flip side, right? When you're watching the news, especially with the news, right? And even social media, with what can be shared now, it's just this world that we live in is that you're seeing all this bad, but how many people get pulled over every day? How many people have now granted, I've had a lot of great conversations with police officers at a young age that, when I say great, meaning they were funny varsity blues type, going to jail, right? And having a good time and being a jerk. But I also grew up, and now my interactions with officers, even if I do get pulled over for going a little fast, right? They've always been like, 5 minutes and I'm out. Like, hey, I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And I'm not sucking up. I'm not doing BS. But what I'm surely not doing is interacting negatively. So I guess my point is that people do need to hear that, like you said, 90% of your interactions are probably fast, little education, little thank you so much, sir, and people move on, right?
Yeah. And that's exactly how it is with a lot of them. And like I said, I go for that, getting thanked at the end, and I'll thank the driver too. Even if it starts off bad and it ends good, I thank them for their cooperation. I tell them to drive safe or have a better night. I never say, okay, have a good day. And I just gave them a couple tickets. That's kind of like a slap in the face, right? So verbiage is important, right?
Yes.
Being real is important. And, this is where also outside of like traffic stops or calls for service, community policing is important. And it's got to be genuine, right? So it's like your shop with a cop, your safety day, and other things like that. Some police departments have police athletic leagues where the officers are mentors for the sports and things of that nature. These things are all important because the idea behind it is that through this interaction with the public, we can prevent bad things later, because we're helping guide youth in the experiences when we are dealing with the youth from community policing. We're guiding them in the right direction. They see the police as positive figures, and it makes the youth want to engage in proper activities, and also provides the resource for mentorship. Right now with adults, this creates a better interaction, because I've had so many occurrences through traffic stops, calls for service, what have you, talking in the store, getting something to drink, where somebody makes a comment that is, they just took it from the media. They heard it was negative, and now they're being smart with me like it's funny. And it's like, listen, you're saying this smart comment about, don't shoot anyone today, or whatever the case. Nobody wants that. No one ever wants to be involved in that. Or, and that's an extreme comment, right?
Right.
But, you almost you can't be offended by this, right? You have to just keep your wits about you, and then be professional, and then engage in positive conversation. And, well, why would you think that? I ask people all the time, why would you say that? Well, you see it on the news. I'm like, yeah, but have you experienced it? Right?
Yeah.
Have your friends experienced it? Majority of the people that I talk with don't have bad occurrences with law enforcement. They have bad occurrences, or their family has had a death through violence and had a bad occurrence with other members of the community, right? The violent offenders in the community, and the police are showing up to handle this bad occurrence. So when we talk about this, when we talk about this, and I say, hey, how have you really ever dealt with the police? Well, I haven't. Right. Well, now they are right now, and we're having this real conversation. They're getting a little humanization for me as a police officer, but initially the trigger was the badge, the uniform, what have you. It's up to me as a professional to change the perception. And they say to a lot of people,
right there is your responsibility on that. And see, here's the thing, Dan, and and we could probably talk about this for hours, is that look, when you put that badge on, right, and others put uniforms on, you have to be able to step in line and be congruent with the mission. And everybody needs to be congruent with the mission. But you know what? You have to hold a responsibility that others don't have to, because I don't have to. Like that same, I could go up and say something like that to somebody in a grocery store. And what are they going to do? Start a fight with me? Like, I could do that. Like, you know what I mean? Like, really. And I mean that wholeheartedly, but you can't get antagonized by that. You can't be the better person. Yeah.
Absolutely not. Now, like I said, I work for an agency that's right on the northeastern borders of Detroit, right? We are right up against one of their most dangerous precincts. And more recently, a lot of our officers and the other smaller communities that neighbor with us went to Detroit's mobile field force training. And this is how to directly deal with protests. And as you've seen in the news and things, the Detroit area and Michigan as a whole has not had a lot of problems with that. It comes down to keeping our cool, but also not tolerating violence in all the areas where there's been protests, right? Versus letting it happen and different things like that. So like you said, you got to keep your head about you when people provoke you with saying something that's off base. A lot of people don't really know any better, and again, it's up to us as professionals to change the perception. Now, a lot of times you ask new officers, well, why did you get on the job? Why do you want to be a police officer? And they always say the cheesy answer, well, I want to help and serve my community. And yes, that is the reason, but why, right? Why? And, and then they give some additional answer that's like really far-fetched. And you're like, listen, kid, you can't change the world, right? Their answer is a broad spectrum, world-changing answer. And it's like, you can't change the world, but you gotta help make them see you can change the world. But if you change one person's world on one occurrence, or their perception of police on one occurrence, they take that with them and they affect other people. And those people affect other people. And now it's an exponential compounding progress. It takes place over time, right?
Yeah.
And we're held to the highest of high standards in law enforcement. So we have no choice if the officers in our line of work are going to stay in this line of work to adapt and overcome these tough situations that are going on out in the world right now. And it's done through training, empathy, communication, and understanding, right? And it's also comes to not backing down to the criminal element either. We still have a job to do. And, a lot of people will say, well, what if this happens or what if that happens? And my answer is, well, what about the victims involved, right? They call us for a service. How can we not show up and provide a service? And that service also involves when we're not called. It's being out on proactive patrol, driving around, being seen. That also helps deter crime, like property crimes during the night, stolen cars, broken into vehicles, home invasions, these things.
Right.
Versus going and sitting in a parking lot somewhere and doing nothing for your entire shift because you don't want to get involved because something bad could happen or whatever the case. And when I say something bad happening, I mean a violent occurrence or whatever. It's just the time that we're in. I mean, if we could go back in time and speak to police officers who came on the job with zero equipment, no tasers, no computers, they literally had gun, cuffs, badges, and a nightstick or whatever, or and a flashlight, and they had to go to a call box in the middle of town to call it in because there was no two-way, right? We could learn a thing or two about doing real police work with the minimums, And some of us in law enforcement who work in the Metro Detroit area have previously came from departments where we weren't well funded. We didn't have all the equipment. We had to figure it out and how to do it in a safe way without all these extra tools. And a lot of that came from using your communication, or as they call it in the academy, verbal judo, right?
Right.
So it's a big thing.
Well, and, it really is, Dan. And I mean, I think that, you're somebody that you have a unique understanding and ability to influence people because of your upbringing, right? Where you have a unique mixture of passion, but also a lot of training in some unique customer service influence type situations in sales. I mean, you are one of my top guys, top performers in the realm of leadership, management, and sales, which are three components that you're probably using on a regular basis now, right? To do a lot of, the work that you're doing. Talk to me, I guess, about mixing, because I know you train new and upcoming officers and train people to be better, but I know you're kind of a staple for physical fitness with the officers as well. Let's talk about that for a second.
Well, that is a big thing. And like you mentioned, in the sales realm, when working with you, that came through wanting to educate, right? I hated when people came through the sales racket, if you will, and they were trying to do that used car sales approach to fitness, right? You can't sell like that. You can't sell fitness like that. You have to be an educator, right? And yet that sells itself. The reason why people need fitness or need a coach or need training or a gym membership, they already are there because they want it, right? Now they just need to know more about it. With new officers and even current officers, right? Because a select few of us are selected as departmental trainers, for example, like firearms. We host the firearms qualifications each half of the year, and other firearms training as well. And there could be an officer who's not as good as they would like to be with their firearm. Now, they may have more time on the job than me, but they're not the instructor. So now you're dealing with someone who's been on the job longer, probably experienced something longer, and approaching that is a unique experience because you're not trying to be the younger guy who knows everything and tell the old dog how it's going down, right? You have to know your audience and know how to train the individual, not the group, right? So, and also that has a lot to do with training to the abilities of the individual. I can't go train them on some special response team related high fast shooting and stuff if they can't do the basic qual. So now we got to start at the beginning. And it goes the same for teaching someone the laws and how to put, for example, a new officer. Everything that we do when we make an arrest is based on probable cause, right? You hear it all the time. What was the probable cause for the stop, the occurrence, what have you, the arrest? Well, sometimes that just starts off as general suspicions. And now we need to be able to teach someone how to articulate what they're seeing, right, as reasonable suspicion, which led to probable cause, which led to an arrest, and how it was chained together. They may know this and they may identify it, but they can't put it out there into their report. Well, now it's no good later on through the court process. So now other people can do it really easy, right? So you have to be able to kind of go between all these modes of teaching and teach up, teach down, or somewhere in between. Right. And if you're educated and you're passionate, the sale will come or the result with an officer will come. Because you're not selling it, you're just putting it out there and educating that person on it. And it just, then it clicks, it makes sense. They feel comfortable and confident with the information and now they're able to use it.
Well, and you find that, because of your training, especially in things like health and fitness and exercise and, management and leadership, you find that it makes it a lot easier for you to be one of the people that everybody else looks up to in this regards? Because I'm assuming you get peppered with questions about this all the time.
Yeah, actually, last week I had a former colleague of mine who works for another agency now call me up. He's a big mountain biker. And he said, hey, my biking's great, but I want to do this. I need to get better at strength training. And in law enforcement, back 10, 15 years ago, fitness in law enforcement was not as big as it was today. A lot of that came along with social media, and the information is widespread, right? So now you see a lot more programs geared towards officer wellness. And I call it officer wellness because it's physical and mental. And we know through what we've done, if you have a good physical routine for your physical fitness and good structured routines in your lifestyle, that will ease the mind, right? And set off all those good chemicals in the body, the feel good vibes, right? And that now changes the mental perspective of the officer. So now maybe instead of going to work with a negative attitude because things sucked at home, or they're upset because they're not feeling great physically, so that brings them down mentally. Now they go to work like that and they can provide less service because they're not in a good headspace. So my promotion of wellness for police is always through the physical aspect first, because once you get those things going on in the body, it sends off the signals in the brain, right? Yeah. So you had asked earlier about being one of the motivators of health and fitness. We have a few officers. I would say probably half our officers at my smaller agency that are involved in some form of physical fitness, and oftentimes, in fact, my one coworker was just texting me. So if you saw me look down, that was him. He thinks he's the world's greatest athlete, right? Fastest man alive, all these things. Big shout out to him. He knows who he is. But we're always coming up with these different little challenges at work to do, like at the gym or outside of work. And I make fun of him and he makes fun of me. And it's in good fun, right? But that camaraderie like that is half the battle of your mental headspace on this job. I had someone once tell me, I laugh to keep from crying because we see crazy stuff on this job, right? Physical fitness is the way to decompress. Yeah. Right. You're frustrated at work. It was a tough night. You dealt with a hard call and maybe it stuck with you a little bit longer than it should have. It came home with you, right? Well, sitting on the couch, eating a bag of chips or having a few drinks is not going to make it go away. But if you go, you work out the anxiety, you work out the stress, you hit the gym, well, you might be in a better headspace to now deal with that. And if you can't get past it, well, there's resources for that too. In fact, We are looking into a program for officer wellness right now at my department, for those who may need it. And in a job where everybody is an alpha male or alpha female, and they're used to handling the situation, they're the go-to person for everything. That's a lot to carry all the time. So the officer wellness aspect is huge. So every year, once or twice a year, I'll put out through social media, departmental email, text message, whatever the case. And it's usually right at the turn of the new year, because that's when everyone's on the new year, new me stuff.
Right. The big kicks, right?
The big kick, yeah. The gym influx and all of that. I'll put out to everybody that I network with, if you're struggling, get a hold of me. I can help you with your nutrition. Because a lot of people that know me now don't know that when I was a youth, I was 100 pounds overweight and almost 6 foot tall in 6th grade, right? Shaving and whatnot, right? And there was a turn point event that we can talk about a little bit later that kind of sparked that physical fitness change. But because I've been in the shoes of someone struggling with fitness, which also then went on to lead to the mental struggle, the confidence, right?
Yeah.
I put it out there. Hey, no judgment. I'll help you with whatever you need, whether it's diet. If you have something that's not working, we can look at it, manipulate it. If you have nothing, we'll get you a base. It's not about hitting the gym every day. It's about just doing something physical, stretching, mobility, jujitsu, weight training, yoga.
Yeah.
Walk through the neighborhood, walk your dog, doesn't matter. Do something to get the blood pumping, set off those endorphins, and that will have the trickle down effect, right? So I put it out there, and anyone who's listening to this, if you have issues, get a hold of me. We'll figure it out. And I do have not as many as I would like, but I have many times throughout the year, an officer will contact me with, hey, I'm doing this, or I'm taking these vitamins, or, and I can't make any gains in the gym, or I'm preparing for a physical test, like whether it's for the SWAT team or an entry-level police academy, there's a physical test, right? I've had a lot of people through law enforcement groups on Facebook that have contacted me pre the academy, and I gave them a basic thing to help get them through that. Now they're officers somewhere a few years later doing very well.
Fantastic.
And it's a big thing because mental health is a big thing for us. We got to keep it in check so we can go and serve the public. But physical health as well. Back problems are the biggest issue for police officers because of all the gear that we carry. And you're crammed in the car for 8 to 12 hours, depending on your department's schedule, with all this stuff, compressing your hips, compressing your spine. So, getting out and moving is half of the battle, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I guess, we've already talked about, so much, but I guess really quickly, and you kind of touched on a couple things, throughout your life, and maybe some provoking moments that kind of really brought you up till here, like I know, and you've already kind of talked about professionally what you've kind of done, a few years back to really kind of prepare you for this. But, what really kind of got you into, I guess, physical fitness? We know what kind of got you into serving the public, but what kind of around the line from the beginning, I guess, if you can just briefly, tell us, where did you come from? What kind of upbringing did you have? Like, how did all that take place?
Well, no problem. I like I mentioned before, I grew up in a law enforcement family. So, holidays, Christmases, all these things, they were not on the day per se. We were always manipulating the schedule to adhere to my father's schedule. With work, and it was probably in 5th grade. And back then times in law enforcement were far different, but he was shot almost fatally on the job. Yeah. And at that time I was in 5th grade. I was still a really big kid. My father, he's 6'3", and my mother is 4'11", right? Yeah. So, we're talking big differences here. And, he was very physically active at the time of his shooting. He had some injuries prior because he was the guy who was proactive and always getting into stuff. But this one was the oh shit, for lack of a better term, right? He was shot 7 times in an incident, and he was transported to the hospital, and the doctors basically said that he was a medical miracle because there was a bullet that missed his heart by less than an inch of space, about a quarter of an inch, and went through this area that they don't know how it got there or what have you. And he ended up with several rounds lodged in his spinal column. And the road to recovery was very extensive. They encouraged him to quit police work because of the injuries. And like me, he's just not a quitter, right? No two ways about it. He's blue through and through, and that just wasn't an option. And I can remember during this time and the prior injuries, because I was in elementary school at the time, I would help him get around the house on the prior occurrences. But this happened in like September of, it was like 1994, 1995. And from September to almost Christmas in December, he was in the hospital recovering from these injuries. And then it was a long road to recovery from there. And miraculously, he made a full recovery and went on to have a very at-length successful career.
Yeah.
That goes towards mindset.
Yeah.
But it also goes towards physical abilities. If he was not in shape, he wouldn't have survived. Yeah. And at that time, like I said, I was a big kid having growth spurts. And when I would have these growth spurts, I would eat. And then when I would stop growing, I would keep eating. I grew up also in an Italian and Irish household. So food is prevalent, right? Everything we do revolves around food. So I was a big boy. It wasn't like I was, obese fat kid, but I was just large, a head taller than everyone else and so on. So I had a physical going into 7th grade football, and my general physician used to be an athletic doctor. And asked like, hey, would you like me to put something together for you? And of course, being very self-conscious, I said no. But then I went and played football for the first time because I was able to, because prior all the city sports had height, age, and weight limits.
Right.
So now I can play football. I was doing hockey prior, and I gave that up and played football. And during that season, I lost like 60 pounds. And then through the remainder of the year, I ended up losing. It was 96 pounds in total from one season to the next. I came back to 8th grade football, and all the coaches were like, no, because I was this big presence on the field, just laying kids out. Sure. I was offensive lineman, defensive lineman, kick return, kickoff to every team there was, because in junior high, your team's not very big. And losing this weight, of course, my athletic skill increased. And now they were concerned that I was not going to knock people around. But still, now I'm 6 feet tall in 8th grade. Right. And the doctors projected I was going to be like 6'8". That didn't happen. And still, I was a pretty good force to be reckoned with, in junior high football. Unfortunately, our team wasn't all that great. So you learn sportsmanship through that as well. But, now from there, I kind of just, I grew and built up. And in high school, I got into football still, but also wrestling because I sucked at basketball, right? No hand-foot coordination or anything like that, flat, wide feet from being such a big kid as a youth, right, in elementary school. So I found a niche within wrestling. I had also done karate when I was younger. So I picked that back up in high school as a third sport because, like the big guy that I was, I had a big guy run, short steps, hard ground pounding, and whatnot. So, kind of the fitness journey that kind of sparked it all, where I lost weight, I gained self-confidence, became a bit more sure of myself, got into athletics. But the turn point was that law enforcement moment for my father, that I recognized how important health and fitness was. And I kind of made a promise to myself back then that I would never be out of shape one way or another. Yeah. Whether it was weight training, running, athletic performance, what have you. And also reaffirm that as I got older, because my grandparents, being, like I said, Italian and Irish, eaters, drinkers, smokers,
Right.
they had some health complications with like cancer, diabetes, heart issues, and these things that can all be prevented through health and wellness.
Yeah.
So when I ultimately went to college, my degree was in exercise physiology, and my internship was in cardiac rehab, and doing just exactly that, working with patients who had heart issues, pulmonary issues, and these things. And at the time, it was kind of prereqs for physician's assistant.
Yep.
But after I got out of college, I decided that law enforcement was the path.
Right.
So, there was that, but it goes back to that very first occurrence as a young kid, seeing how important and life-saving health and fitness could be.
Well, and I saw that too, a few years back. I had a motorcycle accident, and, I messed myself up pretty good. And I was also
there's the pops right there. Wonder if he's listening. I sent him the link.
Right. And the doctor even told me, same thing. He's like, look, he goes, you're in really good shape. He's like, you're going to bounce back fairly quickly. He goes, but it's a good thing that you were taking care of yourself, because this might be some problems, you know what I mean? Like, where I had to, kind of learn how to walk again and really kind of get back on my feet. But that's what you get for, riding a motorcycle around. But nonetheless, well, look, man, we've talked about so much awesome stuff today. I want you to leave the listeners with, kind of from, I guess, what kind of advice do you have for the people out there listening? And, whether it could be a nugget of knowledge from you, to the new and upcoming people, or, even just people in general. What would you give them as far as a piece of advice?
Well, we've talked about a lot today, so I'll try to keep it a little bit more brief. But in terms of the law enforcement stuff that we talked about, the best thing I can say to people who support law enforcement is thank you, right? Thank you for that support. Continue to support us. We definitely need it. And for the people that maybe don't support us, like we do with dealing with the public who is out doing crime and things like that, or we walk into a situation we don't know, keep an empathetic mind. And if you haven't dealt with the police before, but you see bad things on the media, have an open mind, have an open heart, find a police officer at your local police department and go have a real conversation. Maybe do a ride along, maybe do a departmental tour. Speak with their police chief about the initiatives in the community, because a lot of people aren't even aware of the programs that the police departments offer in terms of community relation, community policing, and the togetherness that the cities and the police departments are attempting to create. But it's not a one-sided thing. It takes everyone, right? It takes both sides. And it's only until we can have these conversations that we can begin to repair relationships in the community, right?
Yeah.
So navigating from that to the health and wellness end of this podcast today.
Yeah.
If you're struggling along, don't be afraid to ask for help, right?
Yeah.
There is no shame in asking for help and finding a trusted source and venting out your problems and coming up with a solution. That's the first big step, and it really is half the battle to improving your lifestyle. If you're going to be the person who's always sits around and has a negative mindset and says, I can't, or I won't, or I would never, then you aren't, right? I guess progress that you want to make, or that you live through other people on social media and you see them and you follow them and such, they're out here grinding it every day, whether it's fitness, police work, firefighting, nursing, being a doctor, being a movie star, and even, I hate to say it, but social media influencer, right? There's a lot that goes into that to put video and content and this and that. So if you're sitting at home watching the rest of the world live, you need to stop watching and go live yourself, right? And I'll be the first one to say that I do a lot of work outside of work. My fiance yells at me all the time, you're always on the phone with someone from work.
Right.
So, it's like, and she's right. And I'm working on having a better work-life balance, but at the same time, things need to get done, and the hard work never stops. And because of that, you got to have the structure and routine. So if you don't have a structure and routine, get one.
Yeah.
If you don't have a source of motivation, get disciplined, because when there is motivation, the discipline will keep you going when you don't want to get up and do whatever that activity is. And that's the biggest thing, is to find the drive somewhere, whether it's listening to you, listening to me, or finding someone else that helps you get where you need to go.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, those I think are the big takeaways. And whatever you do it with passion. If you're not passionate about it, you won't give a full effort towards it.
Yeah, 100%, dude. Wow, so many nuggets.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing not only your story, but all the insight. I think that I know that I have I got to watch this again, right, to take my notes and really sit back and look at it from a macro perspective. But I definitely appreciate everything that you provided tonight. Thank you so much. Hang around just for a second.
Sure.
As we kind of go back into the broadcast studio. But, those of you that are listening, wow, if you like this message today, definitely share it. I'm going to have everything downloaded, hopefully by tomorrow afternoon, to get it set up on iTunes, Spotify. Of course, it's already going to be on YouTube as well, if that's where you're listening, or even on Facebook. Wow. Thank you so much for listening. And like always, let's provoke positive change in people's lives. And, like Dan said, get out there and start living your life instead of watching everybody's highlight reel on TV or on the media. So awesome. Thank you so much. And signing off.